our long-awaited program on Oregon's exploding microbrewery industry. Seated at the head table is our member host, Susan Descamp, who serves on the program committee and as the assistant to Commissioner Charles Hales. Our moderator today is Jeff Frane, immediately on my right, who writes the Beerstyles column for the magazine Brew Your Own. I'm not sure brewing your own is consistent with what these folks like us to do, but it's an interesting slant on an important subject. Jeff is a certified brew judge, past president of the Oregon Brew Crew, and many other related important work in the industry. He helps finance his passion for the very best in beer as a graphic designer for TriMet. The panelists include Kurt Widmer. Kurt, raise your hand. Thank you. Who returned from several years working in Germany to our domestic beers, and they seemed bland and flat to him. He and his brother Rob did something about it. They are currently constructing their 4th and largest brewery here in Portland. You know, that takes a lot of cash flow and a lot of suds. Kurt is president and enviably the brewmaster of his company. Fred Bowman is founder of Portland Brewing Company. He has attended all 3 of Oregon's universities, as well as the brewing, microbiology, and microscopy course at Siebel Institute. Is Siebel the right? Siebel, pardon me. And where is that?
Chicago.
Chicago. Then there's Irene Firmat, from magna cum laude at State University of New York to a buyer at Mar & Frank, and then starting up full Sail Brewing Company in 1987, which has grown from 5 to 50 employees. She has truly been under full sail. She has worked through every job in the beer production process and now oversees daily operations, personnel, and finances. Jeff, that's your panel. Let's hear more about this expanding, refreshing, bubbling industry. Jeff.
This is nice. I can't believe that I have to tell a Portland audience much about microbreweries, but I wanted to encapsulate real quickly the situation in the last 12 years or so. In about 1980, the situation in Portland was the same as it was pretty much everywhere in the United States. We actually had our own brewery. The whole state had one brewery. Today there are 31 breweries in the state of Oregon, and a substantial number of those right here in Portland. In 1980, can you fix that? Thank you. No, you can't. Thanks. In 1980, a brewery called the Cartwright Brewery started up and immediately went down the tubes. Was closed down in 1982 after not succeeding very well. These breweries here, which started in 85, 86, and 87 respectively, have all done really, really well. So my first question to you is, why did it work here in Portland and in Oregon in such a tremendous way, and then it didn't happen elsewhere in the United States at that time? You guys have to wing it. You can choose to answer.
I think one of the reasons it worked here is that several of us started up very close to the same time, and we all made really good beer. After the failure of the Cartwright Brewery, it might have been a little bit difficult to get going because people might have been a little skeptical about it. But I think the fact that we all started up close together, including Bridgeport, and we all made good beer, actually made it easier to go out and market our products because people got used to the idea right away that there were these small breweries and they were making very good products. And there are other factors that might have entered into it, like people say it's the weather, and people tend to stay indoors more here than they do in California. And we were all making draft products to begin with, although Irene's brewery started up and taught us a thing or two about bottled beer. But that and the fact that I think people in the Portland area tend to get behind local products, I think that was a major factor. There are probably some other things. Anybody?
I think that there was a definite synergy that happened within us, and I think there was a synergy that was going on the bigger picture. If you take a look at the development of coffee and how many of you drink coffee out of a can anymore, and all the changes that have gone on there, the whole evolution of really stressing the importance of freshness and quality on all different levels was happening all at the same time. And I think that all evolved and created a change in people's mind that said they would be willing to look for and pay perhaps a little bit more for a product they felt was really worthwhile. So I think that we're like with Starbucks and Pasta Works and all the bakeries in Portland right now that makes up superb baked goods, and we're just part of an overall movement that people feel like quality is very important, and that's part of what we do. So
I think to build a little bit on what Irene is talking about, I think that a lot of people that live in Portland or have recently, as natives or have recently moved here, are seeking quality of life for which we are so famous. And I think that along with the coffees and wines and 100% real fabric clothing rather than plastic clothing, I think that the success of our industry is a reflection of the attitude of the people that are here. And I think also it's been my experience that people in Portland and Oregon and the Northwest might be a little bit more pioneering or adventurous than the typical American, especially with regards to beer, and that we found, much to our pleasure, that people didn't need to see our beers advertised by football players or famous stars on TV. They were willing to give it a try on its own merits. That's something that doesn't happen in every market in the U.S., by the way, as we're finding out now as we branch out across the U.S. But people here gave it a try, and that's the first step, and that's a critical step, because when people did try our beers, they found out that they did like them, and they've been warmly embraced ever since.
So if I want to make $1 million overnight, you think
don't open a brewery.
You think the brewery is brewery is the right way to go, right?
There's some line about if you want to make your small fortune, open a winery. You have a big fortune, open a winery, and then you'll have a small fortune. I don't think a brewery is quite that bad, but I think that it's a very, very capital-intensive business, and I don't think it's a quick or easy way. I mean, how long have we been all doing this? For a while.
Yeah. I said earlier that we had 31 microbreweries or 31 breweries in the state. Is it possible that at some point we have finally reached saturation for the market? Do you think there is a saturation point for microbreweries? And if so, are we there, or will we be there?
I still have an article that I cherish that somebody wrote 10 years ago that was talking about Portland Brewing Company, Bridgeport, and Widmer, and the author of this article said, there's probably room enough in Portland for three of them, or for one of them, but certainly not three. And all three of us are about 10 times as big as we were then, plus there's many more. I've given up trying to predict when the market is going to be saturated, because it's so far beyond where we thought it was going at that time. I suppose, you know, it seemed there would be a limit at some point, but I don't think we've reached it yet, because we're still growing, plus there are new brew pubs coming along all the time, so it's still going on.
I think we're seeing that part of the reason that people cling to drinking industrial beers, and by the way, despite the fact that I use that term, it's not a criticism of those beers. I don't drink them, but I don't criticize them. There's definitely a place for them in the marketplace. That's obvious by the fact that 90% of beer drinkers, even in Oregon, still drink domestic industrial beers. I think that there are several things. as Fred mentioned, the growth in our segment is still very dramatic, even in Oregon, which leads the nation by the highest percentage of craft beer sales. And we're still growing. I think that there are a couple trends that are in our favor. One is that the large breweries are having to raise their prices to support their marketing efforts. Their market has been essentially flat for the last 15 or 20 years. And as they duke it out, they're having ever greater expenditures in marketing to try to differentiate their products, which are quite similar from one from the other. That plays to us because they're actually closing the gap in pricing between ourselves and them. And as that price gap closes, our product only becomes much more attractive to a broader audience. And I think, too, there are a couple other quality of life issues that work well for us. Obviously, we in our segment of the industry make beers that are much more flavorful, and that people are becoming more health conscious and not inclined to sit down and overindulge in consumption of alcohol, and that plays to us because if you're only going to have one or two beers, they should be the best beers you can find. And I think that people are becoming much more socially aware with regard to drunk driving. And that if you're only going to be able to have, from a legal standpoint, one or two beers, then they might as well be the best beers that are available. So I think that there are several societal, social trends that are playing in our favor and bode well for our future in Oregon and elsewhere across the U.S.
For a long time, the response among the big commercial breweries really was that the microbrewery revolution or the craft brewing group was not a threat to the big breweries, that what they were perhaps was chipping away at the import sales. But in the last couple of years, we've seen some of the big breweries making an attempt to respond. The places like Miller coming out with beers that are supposed to emulate microbreweries, Budweiser's doing the same thing. Do you feel that you're finally threatening the big breweries and actually chipping away at their market? And if so, what do you think that their response is going to be?
Well, I think there's definitely an impact in Oregon. I mean, we're 10% of the total beer market, and I'm not sure Kurt's numbers on draft alone would probably scare some big breweries. I think that we're definitely being noticed. We're being noticed by some of the things that have been going on, such as the alliance with Anheuser-Busch and Red Hook and the product lines that some of the big breweries are developing. And the question for us really is how we deal with this. And one of the things I like to look at historically what happened. This is not the only time in the U.S. that there was such a proliferation and such a richness of regional, small, local breweries. And when they got defeated, it had to do with prohibition, but it also had to do with that they tried to compete with the big brewers head on. And I think that's something that all of us try to take a lesson from, of saying we need to maintain our integrity and not compromise on the products that we make, and not trying to do the mass marketing images with the women, the bikinis, which we wouldn't do at Full Sail anyway for obvious reasons, but we really want to maintain as much as possible and know what our strengths are, and not to keep thinking so much about what they're going to do, because I think that you can get yourself into some trouble that way.
Well, we don't do women in bikinis either, but we're not above showing Mac McTarnahan in his running shorts. I would agree pretty much with what Irene says. It's obvious that we're being noticed by the larger breweries. They are doing things in this market. I think to a certain extent that will be positive for us, because it will get more people interested in the category. Most of what the larger breweries are doing is in a different price category than what we're in. They can produce, obviously, at much lower prices than we can. They have a lot more marketing dollars to spend. They can get more people interested in more flavorful beers. I think to a certain extent that's positive for us. One of the negative things that's happening is that we now have some marketing companies involved in the industry who are not really breweries. They go to a large brewery that has excess capacity, brew a beer made to their specifications, and market it as if it were from a small brewery, thus deceiving the public. We have a brewery not a brewery, but a marketing company in Boston now that's having a beer made in Oregon and selling it all over the place as if it were an Oregon craft beer when it's made in a large Heilman plant here in town. And that can be very damaging for us, I think. They're taking a lot of our market, in particular out of state, where people aren't quite as savvy as they are here.
You're talking about marketing out of state. What sort of, what kind of range do the breweries, you three breweries, have now nationwide? I know that you've all been selling up in Washington for a long time and presumably in Northern California, but I gather that also the products are now available elsewhere in the United States. Is that true? You have to do more than nod. We're on the radio here.
Yeah.
We're currently selling in all western states this side of the Rockies, with the exception of Utah. There is an alcohol content issue there, and we're not inclined to customize our product for that market at this point. We've also begun establishing so-called beachheads in Milwaukee, Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., and Atlanta, in anticipation of the fact that within about 6 months we hope to have bottles available for the first time, and we'll be starting to spread those out on a nationwide basis. But we've begun establishing beachheads with our draft beer only.
We're as far east as Colorado, and we just recently went into New Mexico. And we do have a beachhead, as Kurt said, in Nebraska. It was just across the border, so we had some interest over there, so we went into Nebraska. That's as far east as we are at the present time.
We just finished opening up our new brewery a few months ago, so for the first time since we've been in business, we've had the luxury to actually expand market significantly. And so right now we're in Oregon, Washington, and California, and we've spread to New Mexico, Arizona, and a little bit further east, and just trying to see what the situation is in the market, and realizing for how very, very educated the Northwest, and especially Oregon, are in comparison to the rest of the country on craft beers.
I understand that Widmer did some experimental brewing in Milwaukee. The Red Hook Brewery up in Washington, I understand, is building a brewery in New Hampshire. Is this then the next wave for Northwest breweries to build breweries outside of the region and supply the markets in that way, or is this something that doesn't work?
I don't think we know. I think that Red Hook's trying something that really hasn't been done before. What we do know is that it's been a partnership with the consumer on educating people about what we're selling, and a large part of what we're selling is freshness. That's why we put code dating on our beer. And freshness gets to be an issue. Beer is a fragile product, and when you're trying to ship all the way across the country, it becomes a very big issue. And so I think that's part of what Red Hook's trying to deal with, and it's, for right now, for us, one brewery is plenty.
Beer traveling long distances is certainly a consideration, and when we have maxed out the production of our brewery here in Portland, I'm certain that if we want to go into other markets, we'll probably consider whether we want to grow at all, whether the efficiency of expanding this plant beyond where we project is a good thing to do, or whether we should indeed build a brewery someplace else near a major part of our market. But those kinds of decisions for us are some ways down the road.
Well, we like to build breweries. Currently working on our, simultaneously on our fourth and actually our fifth at the new Rose Garden. We feel like we've gotten pretty good at it. It's actually something that I enjoy doing, and it is definitely part of our game plan to, as we expand our markets in the eastern U.S., to position a brewery of comparable size to the large one that we're building here, which would be about somewhere around 300,000 barrels somewhere in the eastern U.S.
You spoke earlier, I think, as Kurt talked about the sort of hometown image of the brewery, and as the breweries started in the early 80s, mid 80s, that you had the hometown edge because people in Portland are supportive of that sort of thing. Is that going to carry out if you guys become giant nationwide mega breweries that are indistinguishable from Blitz Weinhardt or Heilmann or?
But we'll always be distinguishable because we make a different product. And I think that's a large part of who we are. I mean, the product is basically different. I'm a marketing major, and one of the cases I studied when I was in college was big breweries' advertisings. And again, it was what Kurt said before, I want a second. I don't speak badly about them. I think that making a product with the level of consistency that they do day in, day out is nothing to be ignored or looked at lightly. I think they do what they do very well. But this marketing case was very interesting because when you blindfold someone and the average person off the street and have them taste the top 3 brewers' products, they can't tell them apart. I would think that if you take our 3 products, there's no way you can't not be able to tell them apart. So I think that we are fundamentally different than they are. And I think that even if we grow, you're still talking, Kurt's talking 300,000 barrels, 250,000 barrels. That's still a drop in the bucket to what they make. We're still very small. And I think that part of the perception that we're growing is because our base is insignificant a good word there, you know? So I think that's part of it, but you're still talking about very small, very tightly owned companies.
I think what we're experiencing as we branch out is that among beer aficionados, and that is outside the Portland market, a very small percentage of the beer drinkers. The Northwest has incredible cachet, and one of the unfortunate things is that that's being eroded by one of the things that Fred alluded to, and that is that marketing companies that actually aren't breweries, they're just marketing shells, are eroding that cachet by one brewery actually states on their label microbrewed in Oregon, even though it comes out of our own Blitz Weinhardt brewery. But beyond the beer aficionados, the cachet that the Northwest has doesn't carry a lot of clout. What it finally comes down to is how good the product actually is, and how effective you are at executing a marketing plan that makes people aware of it, want to try it the first time, as we encountered here in Portland. Back then, we didn't have a very sophisticated marketing plan, and it was pretty much just word of mouth. One of the things that we're recognizing is that going forward, going out geographically, that we have to step up the sophistication of our marketing and make sure that people are aware of it and are willing to try it. But again, I think to echo Irene, I don't see that the beer consumer, once they've tried the product, is likely to confuse any of the products that we brew with any of the products that the large industrial brewers are currently brewing.
Okay. Yeah. I have one last question, very briefly. If you could each describe to me what the beer situation, the beer scene in Oregon, in Portland, will be 5 years from now. One significant change from the way it is right now. You go first.
I would love to have a definite answer to that. I think it would make planning all our businesses and running them probably a little bit easier. But I think one of the things that's going to happen, there's so many new breweries proliferating, and there's so much competition right now, not just from Oregon breweries and not just from Northwest breweries, but from breweries from all over, that I think that there probably will be some kind of shakeout in the next 3 to 5 years. And what happens with that and with some of the major players moving in, we really can't tell. What we at Full Sail think is the most important thing for positioning ourselves for the future is making sure that we run a company that is as stable as possible, that we don't go out on a financial limb. We're really proud of the fact that we brought in our major expansion on time, on budget, and for money that we could afford out of our cash flow, which is a traditional loan from the bank, so we own total control of our company. And I think that that's one thing that's going to help to position ourselves for all the changes that are going to happen, because I think the next 3 to 5 years are going to be just filled with them.
I'm told that Portland now has more breweries than any other city in the world. And I think that 5 years from now, Portland's reputation will continue to grow people will know of this town. Beer is a very important beverage all over the world. People will know of this city for its breweries. It's been actually quite a few years now since the first person walked into our pub and told me that they came here to taste the beer. The reputation is even greater. I think that there will be a few more breweries, brew pubs, small ones in particular. I think there will be more beer styles available here than there are right now. There's still quite a considerable number of beer styles in the world that are not being made here. So I think from a product standpoint, it's going to be even more interesting than it is now. And for a beer drinker, this is one of the most wonderful places in the world right now. It's going to get better.
Okay, I have a bold prediction. This is a personal agenda that I've been trying to push through an organization that we have here in Oregon called the Oregon Brewers Guild, which comprises all the small breweries in the state. One of my personal agenda items for that organization is to establish Portland and Oregon as a state wherein the reputation will precede us. Within 5 years, those of us that have ambitions to be a national brand will be a national brand, but I think that in 5 years' time, the beer consumers will be able to penetrate this marketing hoax that's being perpetrated upon them by some of these marketing shells, and will be able to pierce the veil and see which breweries are bona fide breweries, and if it comes from Oregon, they're going to go, then this is automatically a good product, and they'll snatch it right off the shelf.
It's now time for our question session. Remember that asking questions is a privilege of being a member. Someone suggested that perhaps we ought to restrict questioners to those who like and drink beer, but I don't think we'll do that today. Susan Descamp has the first question, and the microphone's down here in the center of the room somewhere. I can't see it. So line up right behind the microphone and address any member of the panel or all of them. Susan?
A Texas corporation recently acquired Bridgeport Brewing. My questions are, have your companies been approached with buyout proposals, similar buyout proposals, and were you to succumb to that, what impact would an out-of-state ownership have on the appeal of your beer to the Oregon consumers?
We had discussions of varying degree of seriousness with most of the major breweries in the U.S., and we were very flattered that they wanted to talk to us. We didn't initiate the conversation with any of them. And it was very interesting and very enlightening, and we came to the conclusion for Widmer Brewing Company that the risk of being tainted by a strong affiliation with a major brewer was so great that it wasn't in our best interest to pursue that path. So, and the range of offers spanned from whatever interest we were willing to sell them, 10, 15, 20%, to one major brewer insisted on a minimum of 51%. I'm very much enjoying what I'm doing, as is my brother. We aren't ready to bail out of this, and I couldn't quite see us working for or dancing to someone else's tune. So we backed away from those offers. There were some non-industry offers that were also interesting, but we decided that wasn't the plan that we wanted to pursue at this time. The second part of your question was what the perception would be by how it would affect Oregon brewers. That was our primary concern, was that if we suddenly became known as, rather than the Widmer Brothers Brewing Company, as a subsidiary, whether wholly owned or partially owned of a national brewer. Again, not to criticize the national brewers, but we didn't feel that that would lend a positive halo to the image that we've worked so hard to create. So again, that was an important factor in our decision not to pursue a relationship with the large brewers. I have to say that I've learned to never say never, that we still have some discussions going on, and if if one of them would make an offer that we couldn't possibly refuse, something may still happen, but I'd say at this point it's very, very unlikely that we'll have a relationship with a large major brewer as far as them owning a part of Widmer Brewing Company.
We've had those discussions also, and I think for the time being we've come to the same sort of conclusions that Kurt has. I'm closer to retirement age than he is, so I don't know. Something could happen in the future, but it's not happening right now, and we don't have any plans to do anything like that at the present time. Again, I would say, you know, you never know what'll happen in the future. And as far as how it would affect the perception of our products, we don't know really. It could make a difference. It certainly is a concern. It'll be interesting to see if the association that Red Hook has, that's sort of the test case with Anheuser-Busch, to see if that harms them in any way. Personally, I don't think it's going to hurt their product at all. I think, if anything, it will, having the technical expertise of a company like Anheuser-Busch and the investment will only help them. I think the sale of Bridgeport to another company probably will assist them in making some more marketing dollars available to them. It's a little early to say what the effect of that's going to be since it's so new, but how things will happen in the future, I can't predict.
Well, I'm glad to say we had the offers too. I would be feeling kind of, and they were very interesting for us. They were educational process, and I think that the conclusion we came to when we explored them was we're so different culturally. We're so far apart from some of the big companies that talk to us that was the biggest issue for us, and I think that we really feel we have a handle on how this business is run and what makes it work, and a lot of those again boil down to that it is a real product and there's really quality behind it, and it's not just Madison Avenue slick advertising. And it was very different for a lot of big corporate beverage companies to see that, and I think that was one of the reasons we just felt it would take it in such a different direction than we wanted our company to go to that we decided no. And I guess, you know, after being in business for 8 years, you realize you never say the word never, but right now it's difficult enough for us to see that we would do that we actually had T-shirts printed saying fiercely independent and proud of it. So that's our direction for the moment.
Hi, I'm Scott Dunlap with Anderson Consulting here in town, a City Club member. I came back from Oktoberfest a couple of weeks ago, or in Munich, where I drank with thousands of people, many of which.
Did you see my daughter there?
Was she short hair about? No. Actually, many of the people that I met there were not only aware of the Portland microbreweries, but were very excited to hear more about them. And actually, our table was one of the more popular ones there because we were from Portland. What I was interested in is if any of you had any plans to possibly market internationally, where there might be markets with a higher percentage of beer connoisseurs who appreciate the quality product. If not, maybe I should start my own consulting firm.
I just returned from Germany a couple of weeks ago. I assiduously avoided Oktoberfest just because I know what goes on there. We are in very early discussions with a couple German breweries, and honestly, I don't know where they're going to head. German companies, in my experience, which is admittedly quite limited, don't move at quite the pace that American companies, and particularly my company, move. And so, again, from a cultural aspect, there might not be opportunities there. As far as selling the beer in Europe, in my mind, that may be akin to taking coals to Newcastle. But as far as other international markets, I think that there are possibilities, and we're seeing some of the Oregon breweries currently selling. And again, I don't know to what level of success, but to Japan, and I know the Japanese are fairly enthusiastic beer drinkers, and I think that there would be a definite market, and possibly in some of the Southeast Asian countries for microbrewed products.
Our major international market at the present time is British Columbia. There is a lot of interest in Asia. There are a lot of problems to overcome. We have to consider the fact that we can't, if we go into a market, we have to be able to service that market. If it's a very big market and we can't ship enough beer to satisfy the market, I don't think there's any reason to go in there. We should concentrate on the domestic market. But there are a lot of possibilities in Asia at the present time, and we've had numerous inquiries. We're not really doing anything very much at the present time.
Right now, we're concentrating on another foreign culture, Southern California.
I'm Harold Waite, City Club member. First of all, I'd like to sincerely thank you for the samples, which I assume you're responsible for. My question is along this line. At one time, the Budweisers and Millers of the world, I assume, were smaller breweries with more flavorful products, and as they became national breweries, the flavors converged. To what degree is there a danger that as you expand, you'll undergo some of the same kind of convergence away from the quality that's your hallmark? And what kinds of things would you do to prevent that from happening?
One of the things I look at when I look at the history and what I've learned is that they tried to compete with the big brewers head on. And when they tried to compete with them head on, it meant that they had to match them on advertising and on pricing. And if you start to erode your margins that way, then you need to sell more and more volume. And it's in that the crux of it is. If you have to sell more volume to keep your business alive, then you start compromising on what your beer is in order to make it more accessible to larger volume mainstream people. And that's why I think the challenge to us is to make sure we don't fall into that this time around, that we maintain a distance from that's the way they do it, but we can't do it that way, so we can maintain a flavor integrity.
I think the most significant costs for the large breweries are not their labor costs and not their raw material costs, but their marketing dollars. And they're driven ever more to, as Irene, sell more beer because the margins have eroded and their sales are essentially have stagnated over the last 20 years. They've done an incredibly effective job of marketing their beers in that they have convinced the American consumer that if beer is flavorful and even slightly bitter, then there's something wrong. Using choicest rice, as one large brewer states right on their label, is an effective brewing ingredient. Rice is incredibly inexpensive as a brewing ingredient. Some of the other breweries substitute pure barley malt with choicest corn, which is also incredibly inexpensive. But I guess to answer your question briefly is I don't think that there's any risk because from our side, our labor costs are the most significant costs, and our raw material costs are of less consequence. And so we don't have an incentive to cut corners in the use of our raw materials. I mean, we lavish, all of us lavish 5-10 times the amount of hops, which are quite expensive, and many times the amount of pure barley malt in our beers, and have absolutely no incentive from an economic standpoint to begin looking at alternative brewing ingredients. So I think I'm answering your question. I hope I'm answering your question. That from my standpoint, I don't think that there's any risk that we will be pressured in some way to begin competing with the large breweries on product to the point where we're willing to start cutting the raw materials that we use, or even more dangerously, to begin modeling the products that they brew. Again, there's nothing wrong with them, but they're just obviously not the direction that any of the three of us would like to head with our product.
I don't really have anything to add to that except perhaps to say that you used the word quality, and it perhaps isn't the right word. It's a difference in style of beer, because the quality of the beer that the large breweries are making is actually quite good from a beer, standpoint. Technically, it's excellent. It's above reproach. So I wouldn't use the word quality in those terms, but rather use different styles of beer. And I would agree with everything Kurt said.
Andrew Wheeler, member. Are there any low or no alcoholic brews about that you're considering or that are being produced that are refreshing and maybe slightly bitter?
It's a difficult thing to do technically in a small brewery to make a non-alcoholic beer because of the technology that's involved. It's actually, I think I could safely say, more expensive than making an alcoholic product. And once you're finished with that product, then you have to have a way of preserving it, because the alcohol itself and making a more flavorful product, a hoppy product with more barley malt actually has a longer shelf life. If you remove the alcohol, then it's almost imperative that you pasteurize the beer, and none of us presently have the facilities to do that. As far as other products go, Kurt's making a root beer at the present time. Some other breweries have done that. I think that's a possibility in the future. Non-alcoholic beer is difficult. Low-alcohol beer has some possibilities. It's a common misperception, for one thing, that a lot of us make very high alcohol beers because they're high in flavor, or they're called ale or something like that. And really, most of the beers that we're making are at about the same level of alcohol as the beers that the large breweries are making.
Just a quick commentary on that. As Fred said, to produce a totally non-alcoholic beer, not just a low-alcoholic beer, there's two ways to do that. You can heat a normal beer, and alcohol being very volatile, you can remove the beer that way. That's how the domestic breweries are creating their non-alcoholic beers, and by cooking and way overcooking, more than pasteurizing, but way overcooking the beer, they've effectively removed any semblance of taste that could possibly be there. The other way is reverse osmosis, and as Fred mentioned, I got very excited because obviously Bend there are several companies down there that are leading the U.S. in that technology, but we pursued that briefly. The cost and the size of the equipment to do that is something only very large breweries can afford to do. Personally, I find several of the imported non-alcoholic beers from Germany and Switzerland to be very eminently drinkable, but they're using reverse osmosis.
I want to thank this panel. You certainly are part and a leading part of an industry that's becoming more and more important to the welfare and the benefit of this state, and I think I can understand why. The enthusiasm and intelligence that you have shown today is indicative of why the microbrewing industry of Oregon is leading the world. We thank you so much. I also want to thank someone else, a committee, an ad hoc committee, that took the butcher paper, reams of butcher paper, that we produced at our retreat, leadership retreat, with all the ideas on it, stemming from one end of the globe to the other, and synthesized it down to the key elements that we are really talking about. I particularly want to thank Paula Kopel, who chairs our membership committee and is a member of the program committee, who had the final job of putting that synthesis into words, most of which I used today. Thank you so much for being here.